Before he became England's most infamous royal divorcee, Henry VIII was basically a 16th-century rock star. He was handsome, athletic, composed music, and had a solid claim to the throne. This was a huge deal, since his father had basically won the kingdom in a bloody battle on a muddy field, ending the Wars of the Roses. So the Tudor brand desperately needed stability. The plan was simple. Henry marries a powerful princess, produces a male heir, and the dynasty is secure. For almost 2 decades, it seemed to be working. He was married to the formidable Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the Spanish monarchs who funded Columbus. Things were fine, until they weren't. The problem wasn't a lack of children, it was a lack of the right kind of children.
First, Catherine of Aragon. She was married to Henry for 24 years. 24 years! She gave him a daughter, Mary, but son after son died in infancy. Henry, being a deeply pious man who also happened to want a new wife, decided this was God's punishment. He conveniently found a passage in Leviticus saying a man shouldn't marry his brother's widow. Catherine had been briefly married to his older brother Arthur before he died. The fact that another Bible passage, in Deuteronomy, practically commands a man to do just that was, a minor detail. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the king's great matter. The Pope, who was effectively a prisoner of Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, was never going to grant an annulment. So Henry did the most rational thing imaginable. He broke with 1,000 years of religious tradition, declared himself head of the church in England, and gave himself permission. Utterly normal behavior. Enter wife number 2, Anne Boleyn. She wasn't just some pretty face. She was whip-smart, educated in the French court, and refused to be Henry's mistress for nearly 7 years. She played the long game, demanding to be queen or nothing. Henry, completely infatuated, moved heaven and earth. Literally, he remade England's religion for her. The payoff for all this national upheaval? A daughter, Elizabeth. Whoops. The pressure was immense. Anne knew her survival, and that of her entire political faction depended on producing a son. After a couple of miscarriages, one of a male fetus, Henry's legendary patience ran out. His eye started to wander. Conveniently, his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, was brilliant at manufacturing evidence. Suddenly, Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. The charges were nonsense, but they didn't need to be true. They just needed to be effective. On May 19, 1536, she was executed by a specially imported French swordsman because Henry was merciful like that. Henry married Jane Seymour just 11 days after Anne's execution. Let's just say he wasn't a man who enjoyed being single. Jane was Anne's opposite, quiet, gentle, and obedient. And she did what 2 decades of queens and revolutionaries couldn't. She gave Henry a son. Edward! Victory! The Tudor dynasty is secure. The kingdom rejoices. And then Jane died of a postpartum infection 12 days later. Henry was genuinely devastated and commanded he be buried next to her, which is the closest thing to a romantic gesture this story gets. After a couple of years of mourning, it was time for politics again. Thomas Cromwell arranged a match with a German princess, Anne of Cleves, to secure a Protestant alliance. He commissioned the great artist Hans Holbein to paint her portrait. The painting came back, Henry approved, and the deal was done. Then she showed up. Number 4.
Anne of Cleves. The marriage was a disaster from the first night. Henry, now in his late 40s, overweight and suffering from a festering leg wound, found her completely unattractive. He famously complained to his doctors that he couldn't perform his kingly duty, calling her the Flanders mare. Of course, he blamed her, not his own host of physical and psychological issues. The marriage lasted 6 months. The annulment was granted on the flimsy grounds that she had a pre-contract to marry someone else, and also because they never consummated the union. Thomas Cromwell, the brilliant architect of the match, paid for this diplomatic blunder with his head. Anne of Cleves, however, played her cards perfectly. She agreed to the annulment, stayed in England, and accepted the title King's beloved sister. She received a generous income, several properties, and outlived Henry and all his other wives, dying peacefully in her 40s. She absolutely won the Game of Thrones. Next, the inevitable rebound. 5 days after executing Cromwell and less than a month after annulling his marriage to Anne, Henry married Catherine Howard. She was a teenager, maybe 19 at the oldest, and he was nearly 50. She was a niece of the Duke of Norfolk, from the same ambitious family as Anne Boleyn. They clearly hadn't learned their lesson. Catherine was vivacious and fun, and Henry was besotted, calling her his rose without a thorn. The problem was she had a past, and she wasn't very good at leaving it behind. She appointed one of her previous lovers as a private secretary and then started an affair with another courtier, Thomas Culpeper. She wasn't just playing with fire, she was having a picnic in an active volcano. Word got out, as it always does in a court filled with spies and rivals. The investigation was swift. The evidence, including a love letter she wrote to Culpeper, was damning. Catherine Howard was executed in February 1542. Henry then stayed single for over a year, probably because the entire female population of England was hiding from him. His final choice, number 6, was Catherine Parr. She was a strategic pick. A mature, twice-widowed woman in her early 30s, she was more of a companion and nurse than anything else. By this point, Henry was morbidly obese, couldn't walk without help, and his leg ulcer smelled so bad it could be detected rooms away. It was not a glamorous job. Catherine was also a devout Protestant reformer with strong opinions, which was a spectacularly dangerous hobby when you're married to the supreme head of the church who had the mood slings of a cornered badger. She once got into a theological debate with him, and her enemies at court immediately drew up a warrant for her arrest for heresy. She only saved herself by finding out about the plot and begging Henry for forgiveness, claiming she only argued with him to distract him from his leg pain and to learn from his great wisdom. It worked, just barely. Henry VIII died in 1547, convinced he had finally secured his dynasty with his son Edward VI. Edward took the throne as a boy and died of illness at 15. All that work, all that chaos, bloodshed, and religious revolution for a legacy that lasted 6 years. The ultimate irony is that after Edward's brief reign and a short, bloody stint by Catherine of Aragon's daughter, Mary I, the throne passed to the person he never wanted, the daughter of the woman he executed, the one he declared illegitimate. Elizabeth I. She would go on to rule for 44 years, becoming one of England's greatest monarchs and overseeing a golden age. Henry's obsession with a male heir directly led to the reigns of 2 of Europe's most powerful queens. He tore his country apart to get what he wanted, and in the end, history gave him exactly what he was trying to avoid. You really can't make this stuff up. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!